Welcome to the Volpe Report podcast, the state's premier public affairs show dedicated to the topics that matter most to Pennsylvanians. I'm your host, Chuck Volpe. Join us now as we speak to this week's guest.
The following half-hour show is a paid political program and is not endorsed by this station, management, or staff.
The following program is brought to you by Excalibur Insurance Management Services.
We welcome back to this week's show the Democratic Majority Leader of the Pennsylvania House of Representatives, Matt Bradford. Matt was recently reelected to his 8th term, representing the 70th Legislative District since 2009, which is situated in Montgomery County, just outside of Philadelphia. Prior to his ascension as a Majority Leader, he had served as the powerful Minority Chairman of the Appropriations Committee. We know from our own Matt Cartwright at the federal level in U.S. Congress how important appropriations is and how powerful. Matt was born and raised in nearby Chester County. His mother served in the United States Naval Reserve. After Matt completed high school at Downingtown High School, he went on to earn his undergraduate degree from Villanova University in Philadelphia, and then went on to the Villanova University School of Law, where he earned his Juris Doctorate and became a lawyer. During law school, Matt worked for the United Steelworkers Union's General Counsel's Office and also interned for the United States Attorney's Office in the Justice Department, as well as serving as a clerk for the United States Federal Court Judge from the Eastern District, which is Philadelphia. On today's show, we look forward to discussing the looming June 30th budget deadline in Pennsylvania. Matt will also be discussing Democratic priorities, which include election reform, as well as the controversial legalization of marijuana for recreational use.
This is the Volpe Report, a weekly news and political interview show examining the latest local, state, and national issues with Chuck Volpe. Insightful, informative, controversial, the area's premier political talk show, the Volpe Report.
Matt, welcome back to the Volpe Report.
Well, thanks for having me.
Well, it is a pleasure, and I thanked you months ago when you came on because your top leadership, obviously Democratic leadership in the House of Representatives of Pennsylvania, you're in a significant position to affect policy and bills, so it's always great to have a guest of your stature on this show. And right now, believe it or not, although I've been, as you know, my conservative leanings, my show has spent much more time with Republicans, but they've been mostly national. I've had 3 state officials on the show for the budget season. Republican Joe Pittman, Austin Davis, Lieutenant Governor of Pennsylvania, which the last time I checked was a Democrat, and I have the majority leader of the Democrats in the House, Matt Bradford. So it's 2-1 Democrat at this point relative to Pennsylvania issues in the budget. But having said that, obviously a month and a week or so away, 2 weeks away, June 30th looms as the budget deadline. Both gentlemen I had on, the Lieutenant Governor and the Republican Majority Leader in the Senate, that's a month to a month and a half ago. So then you had all the time in the world, in fact. Well, now we're getting a little closer to that cliff. So kind of give us an update as to where you are in the negotiations because, from a constitutional and procedural standpoint, it's not just a question like the Republicans right now have the House, the Senate, and the President in Washington. Right now, you have the governor and the House of Representatives, but you have a Republican Senate, which means they're going to be compromised. So with that backdrop, tell us where you are now with June 30th looming. And then the second follow-up question is going to be, are there grounds for compromise? Are you making headway with your Republican counterparts? Let's start with the budget generally.
Yeah, just procedurally, since you've had the last 2 gentlemen, we've probably gone through the entire budget hearings process, the appropriations process, which I used to be the appropriations chair, so I remember those budget hearings kind of just going through the budget that the governor proposed, and I think it's a good budget, but some hard questions of the administration asked during that process. At this point, the approps folks have kind of turned it over to us to have a conversation about just preliminary broad strokes, what policy issues, what the funding issues are, what the challenges are. Everyone knows, the challenge we have in southeastern Pennsylvania and frankly in Allegheny County around transit. And then there's the things that we don't have full transparency into yet, which is, with all the chaos coming out of DC, we don't really know yet what the impact of all that's going to look like. So preliminary conversations, been through the budget process, still, need to get a clearer picture of what things are going to look like coming out of DC and what the impacts will be. Obviously, we've seen some contraction in the first quarter of the economy coming out of some of the tariffs and some of the stuff in DC. So at the state level, we've got to anticipate that, but at the same time, we've got to make smart moves, in my opinion, along the lines of what the governor proposed to make sure we make this state more competitive long term in terms of dealing with some of our demographic challenges that are unique to Pennsylvania.
Right. What would you say the Democratic priorities are? Stuff that's negotiable, but stuff that you're going to stick to your guns on that you absolutely think need to get done for Pennsylvania?
Well, we make no hard lines in the sand. We are a pragmatic bunch. We believe divided government requires a level of pragmatism and humility that requires those type of deals. And we recognize that the good people of the Commonwealth has elected a Republican Senate, but they've also elected a Democratic House, if only by one seat. But we've also got a very popular, very competent governor who's just doing a great job bringing all of Pennsylvania together. And I think we've made great progress in the first 2 years of his budget. We believe his budget that he puts forward continues along that line, making investments, obviously, in public education. Some of that obviously required as a result of the Commonwealth Court case that requires us to deal with the equitable nature of how we fund and frankly don't fund public schools in Pennsylvania. But also making key investments long term around workforce and competitiveness. We've obviously dealt with our corporate tax structure in the Commonwealth, NOLs, C&I reduction, but we also need to make sure that we have a vibrant public transit program to get our workforce to and from the jobs that are necessary. So I think education, transit, and just making sure that we are a competitive Commonwealth.
All right. Let me throw in somewhat from left field, I guess, but one of the things I have become more aware of myself is I did a show about, this is probably 2 months ago now, and with Robin Wiseman, the chairwoman of president and CEO of the PHFA, the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency. I also had Barbara Wilson, who is the president of the Pennsylvania Association of Housing Redevelopment Agencies, which is public housing effectively in Pennsylvania. And they were very concerned about, and this I understand involves federal, as even more so than state, but state as well. They identified that they felt housing was a major issue in Pennsylvania. I became much more aware of that issue. So, relative to that subject, is that something you guys are at all focused on in Pennsylvania? Affordable housing, for lack of a better word, just one word, affordable housing.
Yeah, no, affordability in every segment of our economy right now is tougher. We've all been through the cost of eggs and everything else, but housing affordability is a major challenge. We have the market distortion where you have folks who have these unbelievably low interest rates, and they don't want to give up that home, and values have gone through the roof. And as a consequence, you don't have people necessarily downsizing because, frankly, you're downsizing into something that has a much higher interest rate.
Right.
So you've got all these market distortions and these legacy challenges, some of them coming out of the pandemic and COVID and all of that. We also don't have enough housing stock. We need to build more. And one of the things we did actually in last year's budget in a bipartisan way was permitting reform. Making sure that we are leaning into the fact that we are, in certain portions of the Commonwealth in particular, in my neck of the woods in southeastern Pennsylvania, we need to build more housing. It is a real problem. Just from an affordability standpoint, people can't buy that entry point housing that allows them to get into those very hot markets. So we at the state level have made pretty large investments in the FAIR program, which is one of the market-based but tax credit-based programs that allow people to try to get more housing stock built. It is a challenge. It is also a very expensive challenge, one that typically the federal government took the lead in. You're seeing huge reductions, obviously, in a lot of those programs that were most targeted to help with this challenge. challenge. And again, that's another one of these issues where we got to see what comes out of Washington, D.C. And out of the ashes of some of the Doge and these different cuts that we're seeing, to see what the impacts are going to be on growth communities, but also on communities that we need to revitalize.
Sure. One of the issues that Joe Pittman had talked about was that they didn't seem to be very excited about the PACER program the governor had put in the budget, which is kind of, in my view, and you're going to correct this if I'm wrong, and I may be, I don't pretend to be expert on it other than what I read in the budget address, is that it's effectively a cap and trade, but not Reggie. It's more tailored to Pennsylvania specifically. Your thoughts on they felt that it would be a tough sell in the Republican Senate, but is that one of the pieces that are going to be negotiable?
Listen, we are completely, I mentioned the permitting issue that comes out of the demand for energy.
Right.
We recognize that we are blessed in Pennsylvania to be a net energy exporter, and we've got tremendous opportunities to tap cheaper energy sources in Pennsylvania. We also recognize the constraints that PJM, just frankly, they have fallen on their face in terms of permitting in a timely way to get some of these new capacity projects that we need to deal with data centers and some of the real growth areas that are going to demand more energy. At the same time, we've got to do it in a responsible and thoughtful way. Obviously, market-based forces, long before Reggie, long before any cap and trade, have largely moved in our economy from a coal base to a lot more natural gas, which Pennsylvania has an abundance of cheap natural gas. At the same time, we've got to still be thinking about the economy of the future, which obviously is going to be cleaner and more renewable. And in order to get there, I think PACER and PRESS actually make those kind of cap and invest type strategies. The governor, and listen, he has taken a pretty moderate, pragmatic course, as he does on pretty much everything, finding a way to say, listen, this needs to be an all of the above energy strategy. He has actually said he wants to get out of Reggie. I will say I don't always agree with that, but I will tell you, I think he's leading the way by saying, hey, here's a middle course, a state-based plan where all of those investments will be made in Pennsylvania to help with the transition economy that we have in terms of energy. So I don't think it's an either or. I would hope that the good senator, who I consider a friend, will recognize that the governor has put an olive branch out there to kind of create a middle path forward. I think we would be foolish to continue to talk past each other, look past each other. There are real demands on our energy grid. We need to address them. I think PACER and PRESS is a step forward, frankly, so we can deal with our demands while recognizing that we need a cleaner economy, a cleaner energy source. So I think we can do both. I don't think it's an either or proposition.
Right. Well, there's a line I heard. Don't let good be the enemy of the perfect scenario. Good works. And before we go to our first break, Matt, our only break really, the other issue that just to put on the table, I think you kind of alluded to it. One of the things that this country is going to have to come to terms with, as well as Pennsylvania, and it is under the energy umbrella, is, I don't pretend to be expert on AI, but apparently their power grid constraints or burden that AI will place on the existing grid is serious. But that was one of the things that Joe had said was a concern of his relative to any limitations on the energy. So a final comment on that before break, AI generally?
Well, I think those heightened demands is opportunity. I don't think we should fear them. And in fact, that's all the more reason I think we should make these smart investments in terms of the energy grid. Those demands are coming. And it would be wise as an energy producing state, as an all of the above state, to make sure that we're investing in nuclear uprates, hydrogen, some of the technology of the future. Yes, we have an abundance of natural gas, and we would be wise to make smart investments and key investments there. We're going to need to do all of the above.
Great answer. Our first break, Matt, believe it or not, and we'll be right back.
There are more places you can watch the Volpe Report, your premier political talk show. Tune in to Fox 56 every Sunday morning at 10:30 as we bring prominent national and state officials right into your living room. Or watch on YouTube at the Volpe Report, where you get full access to all of our episodes, wherever you are. Our guests are the newsmakers, the decision makers, the people who shape the policies that affect us all. We dive deep into what matters most to Pennsylvanians with in-depth interviews that give you the full picture. We're dedicated to providing you with unfiltered, thought-provoking conversations. Whether it's local policy, national politics, or everything in between, we're right here to break it down and keep you informed. So wherever you want to watch, the Volpe Report is always here for you, delivering everything you need to know in today's political landscape.
Welcome back, Matt. The first question is, we talked quickly off camera, a relatively new development. It's been around for a long, long time. I shouldn't say new development, except that now it's actually in a bill. And now we actually have something that's concrete and moving forward, and that's for the legalization of marijuana in Pennsylvania. I'd like to get your thoughts on the governor's position and the Democratic House's position. You're in the majority. The bill that's been sponsored is coming there, and so talk a little bit. And I will say, as just some more background for our audience, that every state around us has legalized recreational use, so that's a reality. And we're the state in the middle of all that hasn't budged. So take it from there.
So the governor has been clear that he would like to move to a legalization position, and obviously he's our former attorney general and understands these issues. But I think he also understands facts on the ground. To your point, literally every one of our surrounding states at this point have moved into it. The facts have overtaken us on this one. So again, whether it's the CD shopping center or the marijuana coming for other states, I think Pennsylvania needs to kind of figure out how it wants to move forward and own our own destiny. The House, frankly, put up the votes to send it over to the Senate and show what a path forward would look like. Frankly, dealing with everything from the percentage of THC, the way it's marketed, the protections around children, the way it's sold, where it's sold. Frankly, making the decision for ourselves as opposed to what we're doing now, which is being made by our neighboring states, or even worse, the corner drug dealer. And so I would much rather dry up the illicit market, deal with it in a thoughtful way. I think, the evidence in other states is that this can be done wisely, thoughtfully, and in a way that, frankly, protects our communities as opposed to what we're doing now, which is covering our eyes and just being inundated with other states and, frankly, the illicit market.
Good answer. As we travel, like just personally, our family or my wife and I, we have a place down at the shore in Fenwick Island, Delaware. We go to New York a lot, the Pennsylvania Society, and in New York, they're like right on every street corner. There's shops and stores. They can smoke it openly. So yeah, everywhere we go, pretty much, unless I'm getting on an airplane, it's a reality of life. What type of revenue? Because that's also one of the reasons for it, is it will generate revenue for the state. Is it just de minimis, or would it be significant?
No, it's billions of dollars over certain years of budget cycle. But I'll say this too. You mentioned some of those surrounding states where you have the open use. I must tell you, I'm not a big fan of some of those things. I think we need to control it. I don't want it sold in, whether legally or what it is now with the illicit market on every street corner. I want it limited and thoughtful, kind of like we did with the medical dispensaries, where they are not everywhere, and they are subtle, and they are not, they're not, listen, to your point about our surrounding states, you go on the highway and you see the Bud Bandit billboards that exist in the current illicit market where it's supposedly illegal. I want to dry up a lot of those excesses that I think exist right now, and move to a much more thoughtful approach that, frankly, is pro-community and pro-family. Having said that, to your point, yes, there is revenue to be derived by it. Revenue right now that's largely going overseas, going to bad actors, to the corner drug dealer. The facts and the people have spoken in just huge numbers, and not just the polling, not just the finances, even where it's been put to the ballot in a much more redder, much more conservative state to our west in Ohio, it passed overwhelmingly. So some of our politicians, I think, need to kind of realize this is already here and put in a structure in place that best serves our community and our Commonwealth.
Well, I think to your point about some of the states, like where it's just open everywhere, you're walking down the street, you smell it. Well, like even alcohol, people forget when they're saying that's what it should be. That look, there's restraints on alcohol, open container laws, and all that. You can't be walking down the street just drinking. Obviously, state stores are heavily regulated about for ID and restricted and who you can advertise and promote to. So look, alcohol, which we all I think most pretty much enjoy, is highly restrictive and relegated. No one has a problem with that. So I don't know why they would expect that, it's going to be a free-for-all with marijuana if it's legalized. To your point,
Well,
it has to be regulated.
I think you said it better than I did. I mean, listen, and we all know the challenges that come from alcohol, frankly, with drunk driving.
Oh, my God.
Listen, we all know the social ills, and it's there. But no one suggests we go back to prohibition on that issue either.
Of course.
And so, to your point, I think there's a better path forward. I think the House has kind of pointed the way. Listen, I was intrigued by the responses some in the Senate. You kind of have people who I think are still repeating things of 30 years ago that make no sense. And then you have some who say, okay, we're ready to do it. So I say to, your senators in Northeastern PA, okay, let's go. The Senate needs to show its hand too. It's not enough for the House with a bare 1-seat majority to continue to show the path forward. The Senate can't just be the one who gets to say no. They've got to show what their alternative, because the status quo is unacceptable.
Of course, and obviously we could probably use the billions in revenue that it would produce. Another issue that I became aware of, the House recently passed an election reform bill. So could you kind of walk us through some of the parameters of that bill? And because that's become a boogeyman, I think of sorts. From the right, they feel like you're going to create unfair elections. The Republicans, it's going to be a free-for-all. You're going to get people who shouldn't be voting. And from the Democratic side, they look at it as, but we can't put restrictions that will depress the vote. It should be an absolute right. It should be made easy. So somewhere in the middle of that middle ground, but I don't know if you agree, but my feeling, as soon as you say a voter ID or election reform, those two words conjure up certain emotions on both sides. So, can you talk about this bill and how it's been tailored?
As someone who said a couple times, we need to find the middle path forward. I believe that in most issues. This one is particularly challenging, though, and I say this because I don't believe in false equivalencies. One of our challenge, frankly, is coming out of the false election denialism on the far right in 2020. And you're right, it became a right-wing boogeyman, that the election was stolen, all of that, which was very dangerous and very irresponsible. And, there's no reason to relitigate that today. But out of that was largely Republican buyer remorse around Act 77, which was the legislation that created mail-in voting.
Right.
And Republicans, who, frankly, I was in the minority at the time, and I voted against it for a myriad of reasons in terms of implementation, not because of the principle of mail-in balloting. But Republicans voted for it, jammed it through, and now have had buyer's remorse ever since. Okay. And frankly, because Act 77 was imperfect legislation, there's a lot of gaps in it, had to be filled by the courts. They don't like the fact that the courts are playing this role. And what we've tried to do through the legislation that passed through the House the other day was say, listen, let's make the elections more secure. Let's give Republicans the ability to check some of those boxes in terms of, let's have more monitoring of drop boxes. Let's have a better path forward for true early voting instead of the fiction where you go to the election headquarters before the county election office before the election and you fill in a mail-in ballot and then you have to return it, but it takes 10-15 minutes instead of just voting on a machine, and as a consequence you had the huge lines. Right. My Republican friends are right to complain about those things, and so we want to address them. I want to make it easy for everyone to vote. Easy, safe, and secure. 3 words that I think we should all agree on. And I think sometimes because of the overheated rhetoric and the buyer's remorse and the craziness out of 2020, people forget this is the fundamental foundation of our democracy. We need to get this right. So I think what we put forward was a pretty even-handed thing. On the same way, saying to our friends, which, by the way, I don't think it should be a left issue, but our friends on the left who say, let's make voting more accessible and easier. By the way, I don't think that's a left wing or a right wing view. I think that's the American point of view.
Should be.
Yeah. So, like I say, we pass something in the House. I look forward to hearing what the Senate has to respond with.
Right. I think you very eloquently put forward. I mean, I guess where I fall is, and I guess you get into the further left and further right, you very well addressed the issue of denialism, and that's counterproductive to having the citizens have faith in the outcome of elections, and that's a wrong thing, wrong-headed. By the same token, speaking for my friends on the Republican side, their feeling is, what's the big bugaboo about voter identification? Because everybody has identification anyway. Like you can't open a checking account, you can't buy alcohol, you can't check in a hotel room, you can't get in fact, voter ID is going to be the law now. You're going to have certain IDs, even to go on planes in America domestically, just fine, and the driver's license no longer suffices. So the Republicans feel like, well, we have ID anyway for everything, so why not make it an issue for voting? So somewhere in the middle, I think is what you're saying, Matt, is where the truth lies. So both sides are, in effect, wrong in a way, but also partly right. And if we can get into a middle ground, I think we can move forward. As we run out of time now, and before I have the honor of the pleasure of your presence here, because it's been very informative, and we are approaching our deadline, I guess, are we going to get a June 30th bill? Do you think we're close enough to get that? And what accommodations would be made? Would there be some sort of stopgap, which has been done in the past, to fund essential services and then keep arguing about some of the other issues? Your best guess.
There's no reason to go past June 30th. We have big challenges. Yes, we have some question marks that are coming out of the chaos from DC, but we have an obligation to get this done by June 30th or immediately thereafter. And while we have challenges in front of us and we have divided government, we have an obligation to govern. And as I say, we are a pragmatic, humble group, and we will compromise to get this done by June 30th. We have a dynamic governor who's laid a path forward. We would be wise to follow it. My Senate Republicans have a position, and they need to be heard too in this process. But if good people of good conscience work together, I'm convinced that we can get that deadline or right thereafter.
Well, having heard all kinds of responses, if you were the one ultimately in charge of all this, I'd feel a lot better about things, because that is the spirit we need in America. And I'll end with this. Part of my back and forth with Austin Davis that I thought was pretty good was that we agreed on a lot of things. We disagreed on some, but it was the collegiality and the agree to disagree without demonizing people that I said, I hope people watch this show and see that we can get along and focus on what we agree on and what unites us, instead of where we are now, especially in Washington, pitched armed camps, only talking about what divides us. So it's really good to have you on the show to show that some of our top Democratic leaders, and Austin Davis gave a wonderful account of the party, that we need to get stuff done and move forward. That's all people want. They're not on one side or the other. They're really in the middle of it. Help us, right? Help us.
From your lips to God's ears.
All right. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for having me.
Yep. Thanks for joining us for this edition of the Volpe Report podcast. Be sure to visit our YouTube and Facebook pages for upcoming episodes. You can catch up on the Volpe Report podcast on your favorite podcast provider.